today's video, we're going to be taking a look at one of D&D's most enchanting planes, the Feywild. The plane of fairies, or Feywild as it becomes known as in 4E and later, draws heavily from history, particularly from Norse, Celtic, and Slavic myth, legend, and folklore. And I think this is one of the reasons that makes the Feywild so enchanting. It's nostalgic, familiar, and inhabited by famous entities like magical elves, unicorns, pixies, redcaps, hags, and so on. But at the same time, this can make the Feywild seem absolutely enormous, and a daunting task for any dungeon master. Coupled with a very scrambled mess of information strewed about different sourcebooks, novels, and dragon magazines, it can be a headache getting what you need to have a fun time. Just making this video, I pulled from multiple dragon magazines: Manual of the Planes for 3.5e, Manual of the Planes 4e, Dungeon Master's Guide 5e 2014 edition, Player's Hand Guide 5e 2014 edition, 4e Heroes of the Feywild Game Supplement Book, Mordekainen's Tome of Foes, Domains of Delight Accessory Book, and the Forgotten Realms Wiki. Phew. I hope this video will help anyone interested in the lore or running games in the Feywild because it is a bit of a doozy. Let's streamline all this by answering these questions. What is the Feywild? Who lives there? How do you travel there? And lastly, how do you run the Feywild in a game? Pulling all this information together and then applying it. Hi everyone, my name is Brett and welcome to the Fantasy Historian. On this channel we talk about monsters, D&D, and history. Monster spotlights from Dungeons & Dragons and their counterparts in history that inspired them, as well as any other interesting D&D lore and connections between history and fantasy that we can find. If that sounds like your cup of tea, pull up a seat and toss a like and subscribe to The Storyteller if you're willing to do so. Thank you all, and now back to the Feywild. Looking at the Dungeons & Dragons world cosmology, the prime material plane is found at the center, consisting of the different Dungeons & Dragon worlds like Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, Kryn from Dragonlance, etc. It is the realm of mortals and life as we know it. The Feywild is found just above the prime material plane. Both the Shadowfell and Feywild are considered a parallel world or an echo of the prime material plane. Its geography closely resembles that of the worlds in their prime material plane. The 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide says, quote, "Where a volcano stands in the material plane, a mountain topped with skyscraper-sized crystals that glow with internal fire towers in the Feywild. A jagged rock outcropping resembling a skull marks the spot on the Shadowfell." End quote. One of the easiest ways to describe it is to imagine taking a nice scenic picture, then dialing up the colors so it's almost unbearable. In the Feywild, the five senses are overwhelmed by the colors, the smells, the tastes, etc. Emotions are high and can swing wildly. Now, turn the dial down and mute the colors. Shadowfell. Muted, dull, and gloomy. Opposite of the Feywild. I'll do a separate video on Shadowfell, but seeing how they contrast one another with the prime material plane in the middle is pretty helpful. Unfortunately, finding the history of how these two planes were created and their connection to the prime material is quite confusing. The Feywild is supported the most by the Dungeon Master's Guide for 4e, which is when the world cosmology changed from the Great Wheel to the world axis. This was then reverted back to the wheel cosmology in 5e, but a few aspects of the 4e world were kept. The Dungeon Master's Guide for 4e explains that the Primordials were unhappy with parts of the Prime that were just too bright or too dark, and they stripped them away from the prime material plane in its creation. This in turn created the bright Feywild and the dark Shadowfell. Creatures, now known as the Fey, were drawn to the new plane of the Feywild and became its inhabitants. Heightened colors aren't the only trait that separates the Feywild from the rest. Magic is tightly woven into everything in the Feywild, making adventuring through the Feywild a dangerous affair. Vines come alive, trees move, plants will eat you, monsters are ferocious, powerful, and magically enhanced in some way. The whole realm breathes magic. Now, you might be thinking this is a spellcaster's dream come true. Not quite. While spells are incredibly powerful, they're also unpredictable.
Wow, what a bang.
Yeah.
A simple fireball can have devastating effects, meaning situations that need magical precision and accuracy are a nightmare. Interestingly, in 3E and 4E, world cosmology disconnected the Feywild from the astral, ethereal, and shadow planes and could not be traveled through by these routes, and it made magic that used these planes to function null and void. This was changed in 5E, so don't worry about it if you're playing 5th edition. I just thought that was interesting. Perhaps the most subtle, dangerous, and confusing part of the Feywild is the passage of time. Now, I think this is something that is quite core to the Feywild, but it is presented as an option in some of the guides, so whether you want to use it or not is up to you. The passage of time is known as the flowing time trait in the older versions and time warp in the 5e Dungeon Master's Guide. Anyone who travels to the Feywild is affected by this. In general, the time in Feywild is slower than that of the prime material plane. As to how much slower depends on how you want to play. Older manuals suggest 1 day in the Feywild equals 1 week in the prime material. The 5e guide suggests a die roll to determine the time equivalence. Why this matters is because travelers who return home to the prime material plane age by how much time they spent in the Feywild. So you could actually die as soon as you come back if you've spent too much time in the Feywild. You can instantly age to your own death as soon as you come back home. Not only that, but they lose their memories of the Feywild as well if a wisdom saving throw is not met. Anyone who has the Fey ancestry trait, though, is unaffected by both the time and memory loss, which is very helpful. Not all hope is lost, though. Memory loss can be restored by a spell that removes curses. The age part, though, well, a wish spell is needed for that, unless you have aged to your death. If this all seems too much of a cost to subject your group to, well, don't worry. We'll revisit the time exchange and memory loss when we discuss how to run the Feywild. But for now, know that traveling to the Feywild doesn't come without cost, which I think really adds to the mystical nature of the realm. The Feywild loses some of its flavor if these traits are just completely thrown out. Alright, so the Feywild is like a highly stimulated and magical plane that is parallel to the prime material realm that has its own passage of time. Got it. Is there a map? I'm more of a visual learner. Is it just in the shape of Faerun? Well, here's the thing. There is a map, but it is not in the shape of Faerun, or even Toro for that matter. The map is found in the Heroes of the Feywild game supplement from 4E. So I was thinking perhaps it is in the shape of Nettervale, the sort of default setting for that edition. And no. But that isn't such a bad thing. Let me explain. For those who want a more rigid structure, use this map of the Feywild. Otherwise, take the idea behind this map and stretch it, shrink it, etc., reshaping it however you wish and overlay it to match as an echo of any campaign setting, either a homebrew or an established one like Faerun, or maybe even others on the prime material plane like Kryn from Dragonlance, or Athos from Dark Sun. Imagine a magically enhanced Feywild of those different settings. We'll run through the cities in the next section. The Feywild is mainly populated by elves who are called Eladrin. This name can be very confusing because it is used in different ways throughout the other editions, but for 4E and 5E, these are the elves that made Feywild their home and are incredibly attuned to the magic found there. But the Eladrin aren't the only inhabitants of the land. Goblins, fairies, merfolk, lycanthropes, dryads, fomorians, hags, and many other creatures and races make up the Feywild. Taking a look at that map, let's do a brief overview of the main regions and cities found in the Feywild and the creatures that inhabit them. This information can be found in both the 4E Manual of the Plains and Heroes of the Feywild. First up, we have Astrazalion, the City of Starlight. It appears every spring and summer in the Mortal Realm, and this is done by what's called a world fall. And we'll go into a bit more detail on that later on answering the question, how do you travel to the Feywild? But for now, just think of it as a region, city, or place in the Feywild appears on the Mortal Realm for a while and then returns back into the Feywild. Because it goes back and forth between the Feywild and the Prime Material Plane, it is a great commercial hub and exchange of information between the Fey and those of the Prime Material Plane. It's led by the niece of Titania, which we'll get to in a little bit. Titania is a prominent queen in the Feywild. It is the closest city to the Fomorians that hasn't fallen yet. So the Fomorians are the major enemies of the elves and other Fey in the Feywild. In D&D lore, the Fomorians are a race of giantkin that were altered by an ancient curse and are considered to be the most hideous and wicked of all the giant races. I really love this because Dungeons & Dragons is pulling from history, from Celtic, Gaelic, and Irish mythology, folklore, and legend. The Fomorians, which were pretty much the equivalent of the Cyclops, were giants with one eye that had a lot of magical power and were the enemies of the Fae. The king of the Fomorians was Baelor, and he was able to shoot magical laser beams out of his eyes, which is pretty sweet, and it also reminds me of the X-Men Cyclops, who could shoot laser beams out of his visor. Because the Fomorians are so close to the city, it is pretty much a guard city. There are a lot of military defenses and personnel that are sitting in this city to make sure the Fomorians don't come and take it down. Next up is Brokenstone Vale. This is where the lycanthropes have taken over. The werewolves, the wererats, and the werebeasts. Mountains, forests, and rivers fill this landscape. Sindrian, a city with looming crystal towers that has been since abandoned after the war between the Eladrin and the Drow. It holds secret arts, a chained monster of some sort, vampires, beasts, and other creeping things. The Isle of Dread, home to the Yuan-Tai. It world falls randomly and frequently, collecting many different beasts. Has hot volcanic obsidian mixed with jungle, and has a coral reef barrier that stops many travelers coming in by ship. Merkendraw, a swamp as large as a sea, is very big, as you can see from the region on the map. It is ruled by the most powerful hag, Baba Yaga, taken from Slavic folklore. Be very careful when entering her territory because she makes treacherous bargains. Noctur, the Goblin Kingdom, ruled by none other than Noctur, a hobgoblin wizard who calls himself the Great Gark, Lord of all goblins. Clever and wary, this Goblin Kingdom is slowly growing in power as Great Gark wants to take over the whole of the Feywild and more. He likes to wheel and deal with the other nations in order to gain power, leverage, and favors. Shinalestra, the Fading City, home to rangers that let the wild reclaim the city. Every night, Shinalestra world falls deep into the mortal realm's Howling Forest, which I believe is North Elsyr Vale in the Ninter Vale map from 4E. If you're using this map and not playing 4E with Ninter Vale, you can kind of place it wherever deep in a forest. Maze of Fathon, ruled by Dryad Fathon. A great oak tree lies in the middle of a maze grown by the Dryads who protect it. It is said that a branch from this mother tree grants the power to control and travel like the Dryads. Senalesi, massive palace home to Tatiana or Tyandra at the treetop of ancient silver trees. Mithrandain, the Autumn City, once a great fortress of Sindrain, now a beautiful Eladrin forest city. It has a sealed passageway to the Feydark, which is pretty much the Underdark for the Feywild, where the Fomorians and other evil creatures have made their home. Because of this danger, the city is protected and watched by the Watchers of the Night that can prevent invisibility through wards and, well, take you down if need be. The Feydark. As mentioned before, the Feydark is like the Underdark of Faerun in the Prime Material Plane. It is also a cavern system, and this is where the Fomorians primarily are and live, and other creeping, crawling creatures that you can find. It's a bit different than the Underdark because it still has this magical, mystical feel to it. It's lit by glowing mushrooms and purple crystals, and magic itself still penetrates all the way down into the Feydarks, so there's still magic that can be done down there. Harrowheim, a Fomorian city ruled by the cruel and wicked King Bronner, who runs a slave trade. The city is found right below Brokenstone Vale. There are a lot of werewolves who are servants and slaves. Magturia, another ancient underground kingdom of iron and stone. This kingdom was destroyed when the Fomorian king Thrumbolg, known as the First Lord, took it over. It is a very important city because the people who lived there in that ancient kingdom had built many portals to the mortal realm, but they shift unpredictably, which the people who had lived there before knew how they shifted, but the Fomorian king Thrumbolg never asked him how it works. So now everyone's trying to figure it out, and they can't. If they did figure it out, this would be really, really bad for the mortal realm, because they could start sending invasions in. Vor Thomel, another Fomorian city ruled by Mad Queen Kaname in the dark underground caves. It is very close to Shinalestra, and is always fighting with them. One thing to note is, even though I mentioned that these are all underground kingdoms, they have, in some cases, made their way up above ground as well. It doesn't really say definitively which ones and where and how, so up to you how you want to do it. Either they're always underground, or they've made their way above ground and established another city or a foothold. Now that we know the regions and the cities, let's take a look at the ruling class. The most powerful of the Fae found in the Feywild are called the Archfey. Each of these Archfey rule over their own domains called Domains of Delight, which is essentially the Feywild version of the Domains of Dread found in the pocket dimension of Ravenloft. The Archfey can be any type of powerful Fey. Old and powerful Eladrin, nature spirits, sentient incarnations of different animals. It was mentioned the Monkey King like Wukong, and the Cat Lord, which would be another call out to the Kotchi. You have other races that reach old age and power like Baba Yaga, the Hag. There are no maps of these domains, but there is an accessory book that Wizards of the Coast released called Domains of Delight. They go into more detail of them, as well as the allegiances of the Court of Stars. What is the Court of Stars, you ask? Well, all the Archfey across the Feywild come together in a council called the Court of Stars. to keep the peace and discuss the affairs of the Feywild, pretty much a gathering of all the powerful and important Fey. The Court of Stars and the other courts, which we'll get to in a second, is very important to know because this is where the real power struggles and political intrigue come into play, and can be quite fun to throw players into the middle of this once they arrive into the Feywild and see what kind of decisions that they make. You can think of them as powerful Fey, kings and queens of the Feywild that your players will probably be meeting at some point, especially if they're traveling into this new world and are found. The Court of Stars can be sounds like I'm saying quarter stars. The Court of Stars can be split up by courts, affiliations, and regions. Traditionally, or in the older versions, there were only two courts, the Seelie Court and the Unseelie Court. This is pretty cool because the word Seelie is taken from the Scottish word for blessed, lucky, or happy, and Unseelie just means the opposite. The Seelie Court is also known as the Summer Court, and this court is ruled by Queen Titania, also named Queen Tyandra, who reigns from the city of Senalesi. It is a court filled with happiness, song, and warm blessings, a reflection of summer. The Unseelie Court is the opposite, but is not as extreme as the Shadowfell. It is also known as the Winter Court or Glooming Court. This court is ruled by the sister, Queen of Air and Darkness. Colder, darker, gloomy. Think of winter. It's a reflection of winter. The 5e Dungeon Master's Guide has a good little blurb of the two courts on page 49. Quote, "Two queens hold court in the Feywild, and most Fey owe allegiance to one or the other. Queen Titania and her summer court lead the Seelie Fey, and the Queen of Air and Darkness, ruler of the Glooming Court, leads the Unseelie Fey. Seelie and Unseelie do not directly correlate with good and evil, though many mortals make that equation. Many Seelie Fey are good, and many Unseelie are evil, but their opposition to each other stems from their queen's jealous rivalry, and not abstract moral concerns. Ugly denizens of the Feywild, such as Fomorians and hags, are almost never members of either court, and Fey of independent spirit reject the courts entirely. The courts have warred at times, but they also compete in more or less friendly contests and even ally with one another in small and secret ways." End quote. Just lower in the hierarchy is the Sidhe, spelt Sidhe, and this is taken from the Celtic, Gaelic, and Irish word for Fey creatures in a general sense. It means a bit more than that. Another cool connection for us. It means, I think, people of the mound is what it means, it translates to. These are your court nobles. Sometimes the term wild Fey can be used for any Fey not aligned to any court. It is an unofficial term, but it is a good one to help keep things in order. In the 4e Manual of the Planes, it lists the other Archfey that make up the Council of Stars, which I think is pretty handy to know, as well as kind of helps us see a bit more of who lives in the Feywild. Green Fey, led by Oberon, or Oron. He is wild and unpredictable, lover and enemy at different times to Queen Titania. He is a hunter and a woodland warrior. He is friends of the Treants, Dryads, and Satyrs. The Green Fey pretty much just aligns or disaligns themselves from the Summer Court, depending on the mood swings between the Queen and Oberon. Next up is the Sea Lords, known as the Court of Coral. These are your merfolk, led by brother and sister Elias and Siobhan. Elias is the brother, loves mirth, laughter, and music, ruler of the shallow waters, and Siobhan is the sister, kind of melancholy, rules the deep, so kind of getting the reflection of the characteristics of deep water. They are a newer power, just recently reaching the level of Archfey, and they rule over the merfolk and other aquatic Fey. The Glooming Fey, which is a bit confusing because I just mentioned that the Winter Court can also be known as the Glooming Court, but these are not the same from what I understand. The Glooming Fae actually have no ruler, and they're more of a loose alliance. Most prominent is the Maiden of the Moon, a mighty huntress that fights the lycanthropes. Two other prominent names would be the Prince of Hearts and the Witch of Fates. Beware of both of them. The Glooming Fae are representative of abstract qualities rather than seasons in nature, dreams, darkness, stars, etc. Those kind of things are what the Glooming Fae represent, and the kind of creatures that align themselves with the Glooming Fae. Fomorians, as we mentioned before, as number 4, they live in the Feydark, the Feywild's version of the Underdark. Cyclops, so powerful in the arcane, it has twisted their minds. I know that was a lot of information to take in, but there's one more thing that needs to be discussed with the courts, and that is the Spring and Autumn courts, if you've ever heard of them. I was trying to figure out where they came from, and it took me quite a while, because I saw it all over Reddit and other threads trying to look into the lore and the courts and everything, and these just kept popping up. I had no idea where they were coming from. And it comes from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. I believe that is pretty much the only place these Spring and Autumn courts are mentioned. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes adds in the Spring and Autumn courts to make a full circle of seasonal courts. So you still have the big winter and summer courts as your two main ones, the Seelie and the Unseelie. But all those other, the Glooming Fae, the Fomorians, the Green Fae, and the Sea Lords, those kind of get put into the Spring and Autumn courts rather than having their own. The point of the two courts, other than for a seasonal effect, is to be kind of a neutral ground between the two big powerhouses that would help share the power and balance things out between them. And just like the Summer and Winter court, they represent the Spring and Autumn. So Spring is kind of blooming with life, and Autumn is everything slowly dying. So any characteristics or traits that would go with those two seasons, those type of Fae would be either in the Spring or the Autumn court, if they're in any court at all. Phew. There are a lot of books that say a lot of different things. This idea of the 4 seasons, from what I can gather, is more of an option rather than the main setup that I went over first. So in short, Summer and Winter courts are the powerful ruling bodies of the Feywild, and a meeting of all Archfey representatives is called the Court of Stars. If the idea of having just 4 different seasons is more appealing and is easier to remember, you can definitely go that route. Alright, you've convinced me. I'm in. How do I get to the Feywild? Well, let me tell ya. Grab a 4-leaf clover, spin around 3 times, and say, "Into the fray!" Just kidding. Officially, there are several ways. Unofficially, as many as you want and as creative as you want. As mentioned, when running through the cities and regions, a world fall can happen, dropping a part of the Feywild into the prime material plane. For the most part, these aren't completely random, but happen to the same region consistently. Anyone who resides within the boundaries of the region that world fell will be swept back into the Feywild with the rest of the region as it returns there again. So kind of like catching a ride back into the Feywild if you're within the city lines. Number 2, another way to enter the Feywild is through an established gate marked with stones or in a wooden grove. This can either be a gate that was purposefully set up by the Fey as a way to travel to the material plane. These gate locations are not shared with those that live on the prime material plane, they're just kept secret. Players would either have to stumble across it or find a Fey guide to lead them there and then speak the ancient elven password. I know there are some mentions of specific places in the novels, but I will just skip over those. A third option is the naturally occurring events that cause the borders between the Feywild and the prime material plane to weaken, allowing passage through. These can be occasional, they can be frequent, or they can be a permanent region that is just like an always weak spot that you can go through. These natural gates can be ruins, places of beauty and mystery, lakes, fairy circles, etc. Most of the time, these are found by accident. An individual or party would be at the wrong place at the wrong time. A player is walking through the forest and then realizes too late that the trees have become larger and more wild looking, and now they're in the Feywild. And you can't always just simply, I'll just turn around and walk back the other way. The Feywild wilderness is alive and is always moving, and it could just disappear, and you have no idea how to get back. You've lost your way. The last way to get into the Feywild, or vice versa, is to get there through planar travel by spell, like plane shift. With so many ways of getting back and forth with the Feywild, it seems easy, but it's also kind of difficult. So it's on the border of, like, everyone knows about the Feywild, but not everyone's just coming and going as they please. But because there are so many connections and inroads, that's why there are a lot of Fey creatures found on the Prime Material Plane, because they have made their way into the Prime Material Plane and have decided to live there. You can find a brief overview history of that on the Forgotten Realms wiki. I think a fair question to ask is, we had the Feywild at home, why would I travel to the Feywild? It just seems like a bit of a hassle to do. Well, it's a place that can be nostalgic, whimsical, witty, or dark and grim. The Fae in general is something most people have varying degrees of familiarity with, from either history, books, TV shows, etc. Feywild's close ties to the material plane allows for interesting crossover interactions for players between the two realms. What about that time and memory loss mechanic? This is applicable for campaigns that jump back and forth between the Feywild and the Prime Material Plane, though a time and memory loss mechanic can still be used for shorter campaigns as a similar idea of slowly becoming mad in Call of Cthulhu games. The campaign ends if the players finish it, or they get lost in the Feywild forever. As mentioned before, I like the idea of keeping these mechanics without disregarding them entirely. They help make the Feywild something special, something dreamlike. The memory loss isn't as big of a hurdle. The time loss seems extraordinarily difficult to play with, unless the resolution to the problem is just making the time almost equivalent, or removing the aging aspect of it. What if we mess around with it a bit? What if time is chaotic, speeds up, slows down, goes backwards? The end result is whatever suits the campaign more. What if time was measured by forgetfulness? As long as players are mindful of time in their home, it stays almost equivalent to the Prime Material Plane. This can be mixed with the memory loss idea. The more players forget their homeland, the more they become trapped in the Feywild and time speeds up. This can be measured by some sort of saving throw. On a fail, the players have forgotten more of their homeland and the time, or maybe there is some sort of device that needs to be checked, or a ritual action or saying that needs to be performed at consistent intervals. And if players forget to do this, either in-game or out of game, then time speeds up a little more. Or flip the time equivalents around and make the Feywild slower and the Prime Material Plane faster.
No wonder you're late. Why, this clock is exactly 2 days slow.
This could be great for a change of pace in the Prime Material world. Perhaps new empires and problems have arisen that were briefly shrugged off before as just a nuisance. As for navigation in the Feywild, maybe there is a North Star equivalent that shines through the twilight. Or maybe there are consistent indicators the players will need to gain awareness of before they become helpful. Moss on a specific side of a tree, a particular stone with a symbol on it, a certain plant species, or a glow of a mushroom, maybe one that's red instead of blue, that all go unnoticed until puzzled out. Or you can just have elven rangers trap them and bring them where you need to go. For Running the Feywild, the 4E Manual of the Plains, Heroes of the Feywild, and 5E Domains of Delight are going to be your best friends. The 4E books give the most lore to create a story. The Domains of Delight go into the intricacies of the Feywild, your trinkets that you need, how to create Domains of Delight, and especially the etiquette. How do the Fey interact with your players? One of the things that the Feywild is noted for is the oaths that players make with the Fey. I didn't want to get into it because it just kind of sidetracks everything we're talking about, but Domains of Delight really go into how important are oaths and what you can do with them, and other things like that. Super cool, super helpful. Next to those top 3 books, I recommend the 3 to 3.5e Manual of the Plains, the 4E and 2014 5E Dungeon Master Guides. All these will fill in a few more details and give guidance on how to play with the time and memory loss mechanics, but don't have a ton of lore in it. Surprisingly, the Wilds Beyond the Witchlight is actually not a great source of lore at all. Instead, it creates its own take that is specific for running itself, including a brand new Domain of Delight called Presmere that isn't part of the map that we looked at. That doesn't mean it's bad necessarily, it's not somewhere you would go to find lore. If this is your first time running a campaign in the Feywild, however, it might be worth at least a read. I've only skimmed through it looking for information, but the overall views are favorable, with the caveat that there isn't a lot of combat, and can be completed with none at all. Because of this, some tables might really enjoy it, enjoying the different pace or the different way to play, or really hate it. I linked a more critical review of it in the description that runs through the pros and cons that I found was the most helpful. Beware, there are spoilers in this review. For unofficial material, some of the books being recommended by others online are A Wanderer's Guide to the Feywild, which is an in-depth guide on how the Feywild works and how to run it. That seems to be one of the best. Another 2 are both the Monsters of Feyland and Monsters of the Old World. 2 monster manual books focused on adding a vast selection of Feywild-specific monsters. Monsters of the Old World in particular is heavily inspired and leans into European folklore, myth, and legend, which is definitely one of my favorite things to do. Again, I've only skimmed these though, so take your time looking at them yourself before buying them. I've linked them all in the description. They are not affiliate links. I just wanted to make the information available for you and easier to find. Alright, that wraps up this video on the Feywild. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, learned a little something about the Feywild. I know I definitely did. Take care everyone, and I will see you all in the next one.